from our background, since we interact a lot with clients from the early planning phases, the most difficult challenges that we always face primarily relate to balance. How do we balance cost with a delivery schedule, with the, let's say, the aesthetics that the client always would like to have? It's always, the first question that we're always asked is, can you get us the most iconic tower, the tallest tower, with the lowest price, and deliver it in the next 3 years? So these are typical issues that we deal with on day-to-day basis, and there are always solutions, and something has to give at the expense of others. When we move to the procurement phase of any project, clearly in Asia we have many general contractors that have the required expertise, may not be able to enter into certain markets and in order to compete or bid or participate in the construction of projects. So this is one of the challenges where we typically need to work with local contractors and strengthen their local capabilities in various forms and manners in order to be able to help deliver the projects successfully and, most importantly, safely. Clients like to control in Asia, everywhere we've worked in, like to control the procurement phase, and they like to buy out everything from the wash basin handles, mirrors, everything to ceilings, light fittings, practically everything. Now that in itself is based on the perception that there could be economies of scale and the client will be able to save money. We will discuss this a little bit further in that it has a lot of drawbacks and disadvantages as well. During the construction phase, in Asia we primarily face the challenge of skilled labor, trained labor, availability of labor. In some countries we have regulations that really make it difficult for the labor to be consistently available throughout the construction phase. So we have to deal with harvest seasons and harvest festivals when labor would have to be discontinued for up to 2, 3, 4 weeks sometimes, which will have a major impact on the sustainability of the construction progress. Safety is another of the major concerns that we normally face, and we end up really putting a lot more emphasis on managing and controlling the safety than it's done elsewhere.
If you look at the 100 tallest buildings that have been complete, something struck me when I was looking at this. There's 82 different owners or developers on this list. There's 68 different contractors that have worked on these projects, and over half or about half the buildings that have been complete in the past 4 years. So what does this mean? What am I driving at? Well, I guess that the owner-developer, this will probably be the first time that they're doing this, which is kind of a remarkable thing, considering the magnitude, of the task at hand. Furthermore, with my experience in Southeast Asia and actually in China, CCTV, Pertamina, Vietcombank, these are state-owned companies. Okay, so they have some fairly rigid policies and procedures that where we have to adapt the way we do business, based on our standard construction practices to how they do business. Developing is not in their core business. Real estate, construction, it's nowhere to be found. Okay, so that's a fundamental challenge that I think is overlooked, particularly with these high-rise buildings. Contractors. We're working on a project right now in Vietnam, and it was publicly tendered. And to make a long story short, the main contractor is Vietnamese. He has an excellent portfolio of work for 20-story, 30-story concrete buildings. And now he's embarking on a 362-meter tower designed by Foster & Partners. This is going to be a challenge. We've already encountered challenges with this. We had to basically teach them how to pour mass concrete. We have to, show them, where to place cranes and hoists, around the job to move labor and materials efficiently. So just as Abdo said, these are the things that you encounter, particularly in the Vietnams, the Cambodias, the Mongolias that you're going to speak about. This is also specific to emerging economies like Vietnam. This is the current model. We have international architect, engineer. They pass off the drawings, the schematic design phase or design development. This is actually one of our biggest headaches in Vietnam. And the reason is, similar to the contractors, they have an excellent portfolio of work for 20-story reinforced concrete buildings. Is it responsible to let them design a 362-meter tower? I don't think so. And I think that this is a real problem. We can discuss how we get around this, later, how we've, overcome this situation, on our projects. But I think this is just a model that this is broken. And I think that even if there is a law in a specific country for these high-rise buildings, it just doesn't make sense. Local codes, and Billy knows this very well. The Pertamina Energy Tower in Indonesia, it's a 523-meter tower. We're struggling because we want to try to get the cost down. We want to save money on material. And what we're finding is that the local code is saying that we have to design the building with a base shear of 3 times the expected value. When we went to the local code officials and said, hey, look, we'll do a performance-based design. We can show you, that the code is antiquated. The code is not meant for 500-meter buildings. The Indonesian code was meant for 20-story buildings. They came back and they said, oh, well, you have to do a performance-based design, but we're not going to let you go below the minimum requirements. So regardless of what the analysis shows, you're still going to have to design for 3 times. We're battling this still. I mean, there's tens of millions of dollars at stake here, but it's certainly not helping the cost or the budget on this particular project. Material availability. Indonesia, again, you can't get high-strength concrete. I was pretty shocked. I mean, I've been there about a year, but I was pretty surprised. The highest strength concrete they have that's locally available is C60, 60 MPa. If we want to import higher strength concrete, which is probably what we're going to do, we want to narrow down the columns, we want to make the building a lot lighter, it's going to be 2 to 3 times the price of the regular concrete. But I still think it's worth it. I mean, architecturally, and we're going with it. But these are the little things that you learn, as you go from country to country about, how the markets act and what's available. But it is a learning process. It's a challenge. Labor. In Vietnam, skilled labor could make $18 a day. Okay, there's no apprenticeship programs that I'm aware of. There's no unions. And I think that this has to change. I think it looks good on the bottom line, when you're doing costs. But frankly, we have double the amount of people that we need, in Vietnam in terms of quantity of workers. The quality of work, however, suffers. So I think that if we do want to improve quality, safety, and efficiency, I think this has to change. I think we have to make it more of a profession, an attractive profession. We can't just get people for 5 years, have them come to the big city, work for a while, and then go back to their villages, which is exactly what happens in Vietnam, and it was what was happening in China when I was here. We're a GC in the United States, and all of our best practices actually come from the United States. BIM is standard. Lean, is standard. We use pull planning. On a lot of our jobs, we say, nothing hits the ground, meaning that all the materials that are carted on the job site, arrive just in time and are basically carted exactly on the floor and stay in carts, as the job progresses. I'm actually hopeful about this because we've spent a lot of money trying to convince contractors and owners in Vietnam to adopt these practices, our best practices. And it's finally happening, on a project at Viet Cong Bank. I was just there 2 weeks ago, and they've got the whiteboard up, and I saw, Reed, the mechanical contractor, actually, doing clash detection. It was fantastic. We had a safety stand-down, where we basically shut the whole job down, trained the workers, did a toolbox talk. Okay, we're doing pull planning sessions, with the contractors. So if we can just take that step by step, I think that this is going to be a very big movement. We've now shifted our resources to Indonesia, and then they're going to go to KL next. So this is something that I'm really hopeful that this is step one, and then maybe in 5 or 10 years, what we'll be talking about, even more advanced, delivery methods like integrated project delivery.
One of our biggest challenges really is time management. Time management and associated with this, the level of resolution we can achieve in the design stage before the project goes on site. And obviously, there are also resourcing issues involved for us with this, and the fee levels are also a critical issue. Now, we've been speaking about China quite a lot. I will just very quickly share with you one experience we have at the moment in Shanghai. Normally, consultants, I think the problem is when we submit our fee proposals, the clients are very onerous with regard to the program, and we've squeezed in a very tight schedule. And then what we find out when we deliver the project, the reality is totally different. We might have estimated that the design will take a year, and 2 years later we're still working on the project. That causes us a problem. The quality of the project can suffer under that as well. But there are projects where the design has been managed in a very interesting, challenging, but also successful way. We're working here in Shanghai with a client called Excellent Group. We won the competition in October 2013. One of the conditions was they said they want to be on site in end of the year, December 2013, so 3 months from a concept to enough information to allow the contractor to start with the excavation and the diaphragm wall. And the client was very well organized, had all the consultants on board, had the design institute on board, facade engineers, all disciplines required. And we managed within 3 months to prepare a tender package which allowed the base information needed at the time. It was tendered, the project, the full scope, including the curtain walling, all tendered to a single contractor. But we managed to develop the design enough for it to go on site by the end of the year. This photo is taken, I think, in May this year, roughly. So all the foundation has been done. The excavation has been completed. By now, if we were going to take a photo now, I think the towers have reached ground level. And we still believe that even though the time frame is so tight, that the quality of this project will be very good because of the collaboration between the different disciplines involved and because of a very dedicated and well-managed client who is involving us in all the important aspects and decisions which are required for this project. Now, this is not always the case. I've been trying to source some examples where time is a real challenge for us and where we're running into big problems. One of the projects is in Mongolia, where we work with Carry Property, and we're doing an office building in a hotel. And the design stage was dragged out a little bit, and then the project went on site. The first challenge we realized was that they didn't have a methodology to build over the winter. So really, they were only building in summer. There were no building regulations. We didn't quite know, do we need to follow American code? Do we need to follow Hong Kong code? Mongolia is not that close to China. They don't really like to use labor from China. They don't really like to use contractors from China. So that was a very complicated setup. And every winter, somehow the economic condition changed. So by the time the project started again in the next year, the outlook was somehow different. The first year, the client felt there was a boom, and they increased the GFA, even though the site we already started with the foundations. The towers were made taller, the basements were made larger. It's very hard to coordinate and to manage from an architectural point of view. The next year, we realized that one of the partners of the client, there was no master plan, no urban design in place, and we felt that the site was largely open to the site, but it happens that the partner of the client, had put a tower directly in front of the office building, which was on site. So we had to look at there's a side core in this office building, this building here in the front. We had to look to either move the building or mirror the building. We ended up mirroring it. And the project was already on site. The foundations were already built. Very complicated, difficult things to carry out. And then the next year, the economy in Mongolia was under pressure. And the client felt they wanted to reduce the investment. And the whole project was scaled down. The towers were made smaller. And the podium was reconfigured again. And the podium was already at that stage literally out of the ground. So a very complicated construction process. And very complicated for us to coordinate this and to avoid complications on site. Here you can see how they then in the second winter had developed a methodology to pour concrete in a very cold environment. A project which maybe is even more, was more of a venture even from our point of view. We built the tallest building in Cambodia. This is a 200-meter tower. And the significance here is that there was really literally no tower up to that point when we started this project. All buildings are 6 stories. There is no local labor force. There is no real local architectural firm who has any experience with towers. There is no building code at all. They don't have fire engines, tenders, which can cater for anything above 6 stories. They have no planning guideline. They have no restrictions in the GFA. It is just a total open book. Being able to deliver a project like that was a very, very challenging task. Over the course of the project, again, the program has changed dramatically. When we designed it first, it's a bank who commissioned us to carry this out. They wanted a very strong cultural reference for this building, so we came up with this idea of sort of a dragon's back. And the tower was the office building with the chairman's office at the top, and that was the stock exchange, and the banking hall was at the bottom. And then again, over the economic changes in Cambodia, the program changed. The tower became half office and half hotel. Already on site at that stage, well developed, the tower already at, I think the superstructure was nearly completed at that stage when that happened. The stock exchange became a service apartment building, and the banking hall became a retail mall. So, and this all happened well during the construction of the project. So yeah, but we're still very proud of the project. It was a very challenging project. Of 7 years, it'll be completed this year. The tower is now partially occupied.
Okay, the challenges. Basically, all the challenges that Michael and Stephen talked about, I grouped them into these 5 different categories. Okay, it's all about time, change, project constraint. Okay, and very often in Hong Kong, for those of you who are familiar with Hong Kong, how developers and architects, consultants work in Hong Kong, we work extremely closely with Hong Kong developers. We start from the feasibility. We're involved with procurement. We're involved with just about every decision-making process. So sometimes in Hong Kong, our architects are called the developer architects. Okay, so what we find ourselves doing a lot of times and using our architecture services or our architecture drawings as a means to consolidate, to manage various risks and uncertainties that developers, building owners, they are confronted with, whether it's procurement process, code compliance, etc. Okay, so I'm not going to go into details about these challenges. However, I would like to take you to a slightly different context. Now, we know that Southeast Asia and China will probably have the most number of tall buildings, super high-rise. And in China, we're talking about the urban context. We're talking about high-density urban context. And in China, there are 160 cities with a population more than 1 million. And there are studies showing that in the next 20 years, there will be the population, the total percentage of Chinese population in urban area will rise from 50% to 70%. If you multiply that 20% by the population of China, you're talking about 270-some million people, which is 80% of American United States population. And these people are going to live in cities, in dense urban area. And in Hong Kong, where we design and we are involved with construction, Hong Kong, 95% of our population lives in dense urban condition. Okay, so what I'm trying to get at, in Hong Kong, and also we see more and more in Asia and China as well, TOD, transit-oriented development, are becoming more and more popular and successful. Okay, this is a example of a project, Lohas Park. We did a master plan for the Hong Kong MTR company. This is probably the largest residential development in Hong Kong with 50, 70-story residential towers. There are 5 schools in there. There are kindergarten, senior center, youth center, car parking, and more interestingly, there's a station, there's a metro station and a rail depot beneath this big podium. Okay, and this is what we often do in Hong Kong, from the planning, initial feasibility study for the MTR, and then we eventually have been involved with some of these developments. Usually a site like this, a project like this, will be divided into maybe, in this case, 9 to 13 parcels, packages, and then the MTR would tender with various developers in Hong Kong, and then so it would be built and separate. And for the last 20 years, we've been working on quite a large number of TOD-related projects in China, in Hong Kong, I'm sorry. And I think we've been involved with about 30% of all the MTR stations, topside development. Now, currently, we're doing a similar kind of development in Shanghai. This is just right outside Shanghai in Minhang. And not going into too much details. Once again, we're building this entire development. We're talking about 450,000 square meters of development. Residential, these are 40-story residential townhouses. And then there are office, hotel, shopping mall, all on top of and right next to 13 railway lines, including the number 1 metro line, number 5 metro line with a operating passenger interchange station. So we're currently doing this, and we just started the piling construction for the residential tower on the north side, on the south side. Now, just to go back, I would like to show this little chart. Surprisingly, for Hong Kong, if we take the energy used for public transportation by the population, Hong Kong turned out to be the most sustainable city in terms of the use of public transportation energy by per population. Where you compare to North America, Los Angeles, heavily automobile-based society. So this is not just a model for a high-density urban development, but also for TOD project, people, the resident, the inhabitant, they spend more time with their family, with their colleagues, for their leisure time, and they spend a lot less time in traffic. Now, slightly different, but in a way similar. In China nowadays, when there are large urban development, very often the municipal government will set up a managing operating company, and then they will build a communal basement for all the topside developments. And we are currently working on the scheme for the West Kowloon District, Culture District, where there will be many performing venues and commercial residential development, and we are currently working on the communal basement coordination and design. And this is 2 particular kind of development model showing that I think in high-density Asian cities in the future, in the next 20 years, where consultant, contractor, and developer were dealing with, within a single site for, say, a tall building, you will have multiple owners, many, many shareholders, infrastructure that are controlled by other parties. And I think that's the context. Those are the challenges that we are going to get involved with.
Thank you. Now, one of the To summarize, on the early stages of any project, clearly the selection of the architect or the design team is one of the most important decisions any developer makes. We've talked about the split of the responsibility between whether the architect should do only design up to schematic design or design development and then tender the project on a design-build basis. In China, we have a slightly different challenge in that no foreign architectural firm is able to carry out the complete design from A to Z because of the necessity of using a local design institute or LDI, which is why a lot of developers are comfortable with stopping the design at a certain early stage and either pass it on, hand it over to the LDI, or in certain other countries, awarding it on a design-build basis. In China, many of the international developers, multinational companies, have developed in order to make sure that there is, to bridge the gap between performing a certain level of design and then handing it over to somebody else. They come up with the concept of executive architect, and that would be retained by the owner or the developer in order to oversee the detailed development, detailed design, and make sure that also get involved later on in the oversee the procurement, making sure that the specs and proper coordination is done. I believe Chia and Stefan have been involved on their projects in China with similar in a similar executive architect role. Do you think this is, Stefan, does this work? Does it bring any added value? And without that role, would the project still be the same?
Yeah, we've seen a tendency to be involved now longer throughout the project and have a bigger role even at the construction stage. In the early years in China, we were only involved up to early preliminary design, but now our involvement is more ongoing, and I think that ensures a much better quality of the project. Also, like for this one project I mentioned in Shanghai, we have a very close relationship with the design institute. We actually happened to be just across the border from Hong Kong, so we're there on a weekly basis. We spent 1-2 days a week there to try to monitor the development of the drawings and drive the project and to be able to control the coordination and the quality of the project. So I think that is definitely, there needs to be a symbiosis, and there needs to be a good understanding between the client, the design institute, and the executive architect. And it's getting, I think the trend is for that for the different disciplines and the local institute and the executive architect to stay on the project in a more parallel fashion for a longer period of time. Because we also need the local design institute at early stages for planning issues, for understanding the local context. So I think it is more of a parallel involvement which will ensure better quality projects.
Yes, I think for Hong Kong developers, they are very concerned with the continuity from, say, a schematic design provided by a foreign design architect to construction documentation and into the construction stage. And we have quite a number of Hong Kong developers who ask us to be the executive architect. For example, I'm working on the Tianjin CTF tower, 530-meter tower, designed by SOM. And we have been involved since the beginning of DD stage. And we produce all the architecture tender documents, curtain wall tender documents. We coordinate all the consultants. We even coordinate the LDI. And if you say, can the foreign architect and LDI do the similar scope of services? Yes, they can. But for Hong Kong developers, they're very concerned with the continuity. And we are even asked by our client to provide resident architect during the construction stage. So they really see our role as the EA is to ensure that design, not only design quality, the standard, and also how to resolve all these uncertainties and risks together with their construction manager throughout the entire process. And now we're doing more and more of this, and also we're training our own colleagues in China to do this kind of work.
Mm-hmm. The exec architect is not only just for code issues, but as a developer you end up with a fee issue because the overseas guys often want a lot of fees. But the most important thing I find is that the local guys don't care. The principal architect who's overseas is getting all the glory. Farrells or KPF or whoever, they're getting all the glory. It's their building. So the local guy doesn't care. They just don't go onto site and see the detail that's wrong and correct it because it's not their detail. Interestingly, none of you spoke about quality. I'm surprised. As project managers, none of you raise quality. You think your issues are just cost and program. You've proven to me why I'm kind of suspicious about external project managers. Quality is my issue. You've kind of hinted at it. I don't want to change the direction of this theme, so let's keep with the executive architect, but that's the issue. The local guys don't care.
I personally agree. We have approached many of the SOM, likes of SOM and other international architectural firms and asked them, with the few clients that are willing to pay the premium for the international architect to do the job from A to Z, whether they would do it, and the answer was always no. Even though there are clients that are willing to pay for a full job, the reason for it is liability. The foreign architects are happy to assume full liability in their home country or in the Western world. They're not very comfortable of doing the same in Asia or in certain countries.
I'm working with real estate in Mumbai. My background is also as an architect, where I've worked in design and also in project management. I used to work with international project managers for Abdo. And since the last few years of work experience in India, what we realize is a couple of things. I'll just address this issue of architects and where do you come off. What you'll realize, I'm speaking mostly in the Indian context because that's where I'm working in currently. What you have is architects in India actually do not have any liabilities. You have to understand that. In terms of execution of the building and other things, there is a certain process where there's a approval architect. The approval architect in many instances are agencies who are particularly dealing with liaison and many other issues. So their role is to get approvals, and in the legal terminology, if one may call it, there are certain liabilities, but that resides with the liaison architect also. We do have local architects, and we do extensively use foreign architects as well. Our experience has been that when you actually ask, and let's put aside the cost for a minute, you ask foreign architects to take over and move over on the field of job and take it down to the... A lot of the very established foreign firms actually do not have the means or the capacity because they do not know a lot of the local issues. And those, when I say local issues, it could be in terms of procurement, it could be in terms of cost, and handling all of the quality of construction issues which you were pointing out earlier in our department. There is a local, there are local architects also who, as this gentleman pointed out, would not be able to, they're just not interested. Our local architects are sometimes interested to a certain point, but they are not, again, what should I say, so involved with construction as a process as a whole. They would probably issue a drawing or something like that. I think in our own twisted way, if you can call it, we found a solution to that. Whereas if you go in most of the other real estate companies, and certainly in Mumbai where we work, we have a very strong in-house architects, design teams and all that, who work with the process, who work with international architects. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is everywhere there are different solutions which are being adopted. And when international practices do come to work in a certain part of the world, very often they come with a very impressive portfolio of work, very impressive, bandwidth projects. And that's why they're called in to do the work, because they bring in the certain expertise. but they do not do enough homework, or they do not have a lot of knowledge. Probably after doing a couple of projects, they may have that knowledge. So it's very essential to find out. And if international architects could, or international project managers, for that example, could work more closely and find out ways of working and addressing these challenges, this would definitely be one of the ways forward. Because in all of these situations, I do not know personally some of the examples of Cambodia or the other countries that you were giving, but certainly in India, in Mumbai, as well as in other cities of India, there's enough of, yes, we do have the problems of quality, construction, labor, but as far as the technical expertise is concerned, there is, I think. Only thing is, I think we are not finding a common language, which we need to find together to make this and work this better.
Part of the problem in India specifically is that the developers do their own work, have their own team, manage the approval process. The first thing we advise as a project management consultant, it's extremely important for us to make sure that every party's responsibilities and liabilities are very clear and there is no overlap. We do not advise clients to issue drawings, to sign drawings, which is very common with 90% of the developers. As we started working there, clients started realizing that when we're pointing out certain coordination problems, certain problems on site, and the associated liability with that, they immediately decided, shut down their own architectural department, said, we don't want to deal with it, we don't want to assume any responsibility for that. That's one of the problems. And the other issue is that the Council of Architecture in India has a lot of restrictions on allowing foreign architects to register to be able to legally practice, under the law, legally practice architecture. So you can do it overseas, produce drawings and present them, but practicing architecture in India becomes an improper practice. If they change that particular requirement, then I think that would encourage a lot of foreign architects, even Indian architects who have been working overseas, to come back and register and operate. And there is no doubt that that interaction in itself will lead to creating a lot more local practices with the requisite experience to be able to bridge that gap.
Yeah, but my feeling is, and we are specifically talking about these super tall buildings, some of these countries that just don't have the capacity. I mean, China is basically there. They've been doing this for the past 20 years, okay? So the local design institute, they are capable. I mean, EKD, their name is probably on half the buildings, that are up, that are over 200 meters high. Okay, so China's not really the issue. It's countries like Cambodia. Like you said, you go when you're building a tower, and there are no local architects that have any experience over 6 stories. So I say, yes, that there is definitely a role, for the local architect and engineer. But for these types of buildings, it should be code compliance. It should be, advising, getting the permits, things like that. But the technical side, particularly the major elements of the building, fire, life safety, steel, things that they don't really have experience in doing, to me, it's worth the extra money, okay, through efficient design. I think you're probably going to save money, actually. If you just hire an architect and an engineer and let them take it all the way through, yeah, I'd argue you probably save money.
So, like you mentioned, Michael, that there's a, it's worth the money. So that means there's a cost premium. And that's what you mentioned also, Mark, that the international guys want extra fees. But in line with your quality comment, there's also a premium to that, right? If to managing that side of it, and the owners have to be willing to, put in that extra upfront, investment in order to make this happen, right? But more often than not, we see owners that say, "Oh well, no, let's design fees," and they're worried about design fees, which are so small compared to, the size of what we're talking about with these major buildings, and somewhere that we have to educate owners to bridge that gap, and then get beyond protectionist things like the LDIs in China, not being able to practice in India. I think Singapore's similar. Internationals just can't come in and set up shop. They protect themselves. So
this question or this aspect of quality, we in a way, we're kind of like the old school of architect. We still believe in, as architect, we're as good as what is built. And I think to touch on the comment regarding common languages, we find that for the design coordination that we often provide to our clients, not only for the schematic DD, CD stages, but we find ourselves being involved more and more with contractors' design, curtain wall design, method statement on site, main contractors. So I think it's really the belief in turning out good quality building and how to be involved with the design decisions, not only in the pretty pictures, but also to the execution part. I think that's where some of our clients, they see the EA role is very important, but also it has to do with how a particular consulting firm, the EA, see their role in this process. Mm-hmm. So I believe there are the common languages, but it's the commitment, the belief to achieve quality buildings. Those are probably the more important languages mm-hmm. for developers and construction industries.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to procurement. We typically would like to work within a structured, transparent procurement system, but in China and in Asia in general, developers like to have total control of the process, primarily in order to be able to have the opportunity to either save cost or work with preferred partners or vendors that they have a long-standing working relationship with. The first question is, would you want to have more role in that process as you currently have? From our perspective, we see a typical developer going and approaching a curtain wall suppliers, 2 or 3, and getting quotations, and then when the price is above budget, the first question is, how can we reduce the cost? And to reduce the cost, obviously, you have to reduce the specifications, you have to reduce the quality. Nobody asks the question, how can I reduce the cost while maintaining the same performance and the same quality and the same durability? It's always cost reduction rather than value engineering to the true sense. And in many, many cases, that downgrades the overall property and the project, and we start getting into trouble. Would you like to have had more role during the selection of the materials, subcontractors or vendors, the systems that have ultimately been selected, or you're getting that opportunity anyway?
Yeah, I mean, we are very deeply involved in this process, and it starts really at a mock-up stage, you know, where we have a very in-depth involvement in the selection of the materials, the selection of the glass, the specifications of the products. But of course, if at that stage the project is too expensive and the curtain walling system is too expensive and value engineering is tough, the value engineering really has to happen at the design stage, much earlier than that. And you can look at optimizing the building shape or simplifying the cladding system or simplifying the units or reducing the number of units or simplifying the corners. It has to happen at the design stage. So if we only find out once it's tendered,
it's too late, yeah.
Then I think it's tough. Then I think the building will suffer.
The problem with doing the value engineering at the design stage is that even though most of the quantity surveyors and clients have their own database and project management companies, every project is different. Some have curved glass, some have special specification glass, special structural support system. So it's very difficult to go to a database and say it's going to cost so much per square meter. And so everybody tends to rely on the local fabricators and vendors to get some price indications. And by the time you start the procurement process, Aluminium prices go up, currency rate fluctuations have an impact, or the initial estimates were not correct at the time of the design. So these are always challenges that when we are on site, it could either delay the construction phase and or impact the final product on the project.
Actually, my experience is similar to yours. We usually do have a good amount of control over the procurement process, and ultimately the decision is made by the owner. But what we find is that during design, the owners want everything. You know what I mean? And usually, if you have a cost consultant, or if there's a lot of pressure, to put on paper that we can meet the number, we can meet the number, and that's when you get into problems, because then when you do tender it out, and the prices come back, then exactly what you said happens. Then how can we save money on the curtain wall? How can we start to cheapen things up? That's exactly my experience.
A little bit the opposite.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think QSs are quite critical for the process of controlling the cost of the project. But normally in our case, the project always overcost at the design stage. So we have to find ways to make the building more efficient and reduce the cost somehow. But I must admit, estimating is not a 100% accurate science, right? So there are normally some surprises.
In the American system, we don't have QSs. Okay, we basically have a general contracting system, and we use the market to determine what the prices are, and we're never off by that much. I mean, I guess so. I'm not a big fan of the QS system. I have to say, I don't think it works, and
No, I don't know actually. I feel that it's now getting more and more accurate, and you can more and more accurately predict what the cost of the building is. We also obviously now have to use a lot more BIM, building integrated modeling, which allows for more accurate measurings. We can determine the price for like for cladding systems, for example, right? If you have complex corners, round double glazed units or so, that I think all these prices can be determined now to some degree. The finishes, whether it's anodizing PVF2 or whatever. Like for example, anodizing in Europe is quite affordable. In China, we know it's expensive because they don't produce it that much. Okay. A lot of these things, I think, are now there's a huge amount of data available. I think.
I just don't see why you just don't ask the contractor. You know what I mean? You know who's going to price the thing. Well, no, you do it during the design.
During the design, but you don't know whether that's the only contractor, right? So.
Well, you bid it out to 4 or 5, and that's what we do, and and it seems to work a lot more efficiently and a lot better. I mean, it's.
I think, Stephen, working with QS, one of the things that we do is in the early stages of design, together with the client, we try to set up these outline specification, basic standard of finishes or building system. Because very often, if you tell QS, okay, I want a curtain wall building, they go, okay, so many dollars per square meter, without knowing what the design is going after. So I think to set up standards and early outline specifications is quite helpful to the QS to come up with a more closer estimate. Now, we find that in the past 10 years, especially in Hong Kong, the construction cost has been escalating tremendously. And there are many projects that we're involved with, especially with Hong Kong government projects, because the M&E cost escalated in a higher rate than the building component. And we end up asked by various clients to change the design, the elevation, finishes, in order to maintain the total budget for the project and satisfying the basic building services costs. And so sometimes it's not the architecture or the architecture design that is, say, overpriced. Sometimes we are affected by foundation works or M&E works. Mm-hmm.
That's typical. Our experience has been that we're not a very big fan of the QSs again, but mainly because of the concept of the way it's done. But on a lump sum type of contract, they tend to overestimate the price so that they're always on the safe side. On a remeasured type of contract or any other form of contract, when the budget is very tight, then they don't have to worry about the overall budget. It's the measurement, initial measurement, that becomes very critical. So whenever we ask to substantiate and validate the pricing and give us an indication of the latest projects that were tendered and awarded for similar scope, similar complexity, similar nature, similar specifications, we always find that there is a certain percentage of 5 to 10% that's always embedded in. So because it's a lump sum tender or project contract, they want to avoid the possibility of having to redesign and then redo the packages and redo all the work at their own cost, which ends up being a problem for everybody, as well as reputation, of course.
I don't think it's a debate about QSs or not QSs. I think it's about common purpose, and it either exists in a team, in a project. It's a tone set by the owner or not, and you either have a collective assembly of professional talent and capability, or you don't. And you're either managing the fact that it doesn't exist, or you're enjoying the benefit of everyone with a common purpose contributing to a result. A commodity, problem in the market doesn't just become a design problem or a procurement problem. And I think anyone in the team is capable of contributing to, mitigating that. So I think if the topic's project management, I think it could be reclassified as leadership and sort of a community buy-in to common purpose that's checked and sort of committed to on an ongoing basis. It needs to be maintained.
You're absolutely right. That brings us back to the point that Michael had. If clients, developers are willing to accept what is a reasonable budget from day one, then the team can work together in order to work towards achieving that with a reasonable contingency to deal with any fluctuation in commodity prices, currency exchange risk, and other changes in legislation. But when the initial budget is unreasonable and is very low, and everybody's trying to work within that budget, then it puts a lot of pressure on everybody to try and cut corners here and there to make sure that the job is going to see the light of day. And then the problem will only surface either at the tender stage or at the end of the job. I mean, that's the unfortunate part about it. And the developer will end up paying the same amount at the end of the day that what is reasonable, but it's going to happen ultimately. Since we're talking, we have one of the developers from India. One of the challenges that we've had, I think with Turner and others as well, is trying to investigate the local market in India as an example, and we have similar challenges as well in Vietnam and in other countries, is to see why there aren't so many international contractors working in the country. And the biggest problem two problems that we've identified were, one, the local compliances by the set laws and regulations that are too cumbersome and they need to be streamlined. And hopefully with the new government there is a move now to try and achieve that in order to encourage more FDIs and more foreign investment and foreign expertise to come in. And the second reason is the difficulty to engage labor in the country. It's very difficult to, you need to rely on a system of local labor suppliers. And you would find on one project that you have at least 20 or 30 different labor suppliers because nobody has enough resources that are available to suit the project. So in order to maintain a very tight schedule and have a steady flow of trained and skilled labor from one source is a challenge. And these are some of the regulatory constraints that impact the ability of certain developers who are willing to pay a premium to get the right expertise from the GCs or general contractors to be able to achieve that. Moving on, there were some interesting discussions with Anthony Wood in the session this morning, mainly about the criteria that go into the design of tall buildings and the suggestions that were made about mainly trying to make the buildings more sustainable, as well as, for example, in introducing solar panels and wind turbines and the like. Has anybody been involved in any of the challenges associated with managing such a project?
Currently under design, this Pertamina Energy Tower, it's the energy company of Indonesia, so the theme is energy conservation for the whole campus. And yeah, wind turbines, as Anthony mentioned, existing buildings, they don't turn much, and the payback on them is very little in a tall building. So what do you do with them? They're nice ideas, but they just,
it's difficult.
The payback's not there. And so other things, there's other much more efficient means of energy reduction.
The lesson learned from that, from our perspective, is we've worked on a 300-meter tower in Dubai, which had a built-in wind turbine, and we've tried to push from the beginning to have a backup plan just in case the feasibility of the project, either from a technical side or from a commercial side, was not there. And unfortunately, towards the end of when we started digging the ground, we had to redo the design from scratch, and that had a major toll on the overall viability of the project and the schedule.
I mentioned the communal basement kind of model. Nowadays in China, many of these communal basement, the managing company or the municipal government, they will put in district cooling or certain energy provisions, and they will require the topside development owner they have to pay or be connected, involved with those. So that's a very good point. We've been having discussion with our client on projects, how much backup energy provision should be provided just in case if the district energy supply stop for a short moment. So it is a difficult decision to make, because for that kind of development, many of the developers, they have to subscribe, they have to be required to be part of that scheme. And it's difficult to assess what's the amount of backup energy provision. Mm-hmm. I think in a way it's similar to the idea of a wind turbine, whether it breaks down. Mm-hmm.
Okay. On the issue of codes and regulations impacting developments of tall buildings, what was your most the most difficult challenge that you had to achieve on this specific project?
Many of you probably have probably more experience. In China, especially the super tall buildings, the current codes are not written to address these super tall buildings. So there are, whether structure, seismic, fire engineering, fire aspect, fire safety, all these are in our design, they're above the current code requirements. So it's quite a lengthy process to conduct fire engineering, performance-based design, and then also the consultation with the relevant government authorities. And very often we from the beginning of the project, we try to do a projection how these critical steps may affect the original project program the client has. So I often use the analogy, the story of the race between the rabbit and the turtle. The rabbit, the client gives you a reasonable time frame, say, so we're running very fast, but always it's a slow-moving critical co-compliance or task that how we synchronize that, how we are able to project the risk uncertainties, how we manage that. So that's a very important aspect in tall building designs and project in China.
Yeah, I think for projects in China, the main challenge is the expert reviews, because you can't predict the outcome necessarily. I must say, overall, I think the system kind of works in China. The code is not tailored for super tall buildings. That means generally you would tend to over-design, and you have the structural elements maybe too big, the amount of bracing required too big, the stiffness required too big. But then you have an opportunity to present it to the expert panels, and normally that is my impression. The compromise which is settled for is actually a reasonable compromise. Is what I feel. So I think that in China works quite well. I mean, obviously, if you do projects in countries where there are no codes, Mongolia, we had a big challenge because we started with the Hong Kong code, and then there was some debate of whether the Chinese code should be used for fire safety, and then ultimately, I think when the project was already on site, it was decided that the American safety code should be adopted. So that can be challenging.
When we worked on the Shanghai TOD project, one interesting issue is that in China, the different codes governing different building types. And sometimes these codes, they are administered by different ministry in China. For example, we're putting all these buildings on top of these railway lines. So there are piles and columns going to the railway zone. But then there are different codes governing the design criteria. We have an interchange station in operation. We are going to embed that into our retail mall interface design. And then the fire safety code govern the civilian building, but the same fire safety code do not govern the station. So we have to work with these different codes, govern different building types, and how to define the interfaces, how to tackle these issues. So from the beginning of the project, we look at all these potential code compliance risks. And we at the very early stage, as we are doing the feasibility study, we try to single out what aspect of the project, what aspect of design will require expert panel review, what kind of consultation process, so on and so forth. So we do that very closely with our clients.
Mm-hmm. We always try to work with have a plan and a backup plan in case some regulatory approvals or we have some code compliance issues, so that the overall process is not really impacted drastically. The unfortunate part on one of the projects, for example, we were helpless. We were not able to do anything because, and it's in India where before you start any construction, even excavation, you need to have the Ministry of Energy and Forestry approval. Generally, in many countries, you can excavate without. There is no risk excavating with a certain basic approval, excavation permit. But you had 4 million square feet of development that were waiting there. The contractors mobilized and ready to go. Everybody's ready to go. And the guy who sits on the committee that has to give that MOF approval passed away. And it took about 10 months to appoint a replacement. And that's something that is very, very difficult to predict or even deal with. But these are some of the challenges that obviously we'll have to deal with.
Compliance is a big challenge, I think, any part of the world, code compliance. We have international architects, international consultants, and we have the local architects, and then kind of marry them. Comes with the British standards or the American standards or the Canadian standards, and we have the local standards. So which one prevails? And then there's a big confusion that happens is whether are we really prepared and do we have the correct codes for the tall buildings? The case in point could be any developing countries, emerging economies, probably India more particular where I'm looking after. Yeah, we don't have any real codes that defines for super tall and tall buildings. So obviously you'll have to kind of rely on what's the best practice that's followed elsewhere, and we try to implement the best. There are a lot of projects wherein we can also find that we get stuck in between because there are certain code issues that has been found out recently. It cannot be an afterthought. It cannot be something that has to come during the construction stage. It has to come while we are designing. The projects take a long time, 4 years, could be sometimes even 5 years, 6 times, and there are code changes that happen in between. And suddenly, there's certain things that go retro and it's being applicable. So there are certain things which there are changes that needs to be done. Having said that, I think from the project manager's perspective, I think it's extremely important that we have, just like we do due validity and validation and check on design and cost and schedule, I think we need to focus on the codes also as much as any other consultant focuses. Because we don't give a very deep thought about it. We just leave it as, okay, you're with the ASTM standards, this one, you're with the British codes, so it's fine. But I think we need to get into all the approval processes that are required, what are the documentation that's necessary, how long does it take, and therefore what will be the effect on the schedule. Obviously, it has a kick-on effect even on the cost. All these things are interrelated. And I think in emerging economies, this becomes a very, very vital point. And as project managers, I feel we have to really focus on it right from day one. And yes, it's very helpful at the pre-construction stage when a project manager is brought on board. He'll be able to truly add value into the entire system.
Another way of adding value is, which is the biggest problem for us, is telling the client the truth. We've been in so many situations where we're prepped up before a meeting, high-level meeting with the CEO, chairman, decision maker, not to convey the bad news, just to say what the decision maker is willing to hear. He needs to leave the meeting happy. He has a wedding the next day, so we don't want to upset him. And that's something that we cannot do. And on one of the projects, the client came in and said, I want to deliver this building in February 15 months from now. And when we said it cannot be done, and we've done a detailed analysis why it cannot be done, recognizing that we could be off the project, then we decided to go and say the truth, that that's how long it takes, and there's a major risk involved in accelerating the work unnecessarily. It will impact quality, it will impact the cost, and it will impact the maintenance in the future. But that's one of the biggest challenges that we normally face.
We have been very fortunate. Our clients, especially their in-house managers, they want to know the problems. I think what is important for consultant, in our case, an architect, when we bring up an issue or a problem, it's not good enough just to say, oh, here's a problem, here's the issue we're confronted with, but also to come up with coordinated options, how to deal with, how to solve the issues. I think that's what client wants to hear. If there are problems, they want to know, how can we approach it? How can we do about this? Okay, what are the risks? Time, in terms of time and cost, and etc. So in that case, we have been very blessed. Our client wants to know the problem, provided we can come up with the consulting team options and solutions.
Mm-hmm. Our biggest problem, I think, with projects in China is the decision-making process within the client bodies. That normally on a day-to-day basis you liaise with project managers or middle management within the client body, and the ultimate decision maker is really only the chairman. And you might be led a certain path by the design team to develop the project in a certain way, and the chairman might have totally different views. So and that happens a lot in our project. So we really seek this high-level decision-making process. And when it comes to that, we would normally be fairly direct, trying to be diplomatic, but fairly direct. Yeah. And most of the time, I would say, I agree with what you say. There's an appreciation for that, actually, because if there are cases, or if there are certain elements of the project which have to be resolved in some way, then ultimately that everyone has to accept that and stand up to it.
Generally speaking, safety is always the highest concern and overrides any monetary gain, any cost or schedule consideration. The safety of the people and the safety of the installations have to always be the overriding priorities. Next is always quality from our perspectives, even though we have to worry about achieving the magic word that I used in the beginning is we need to achieve a balance between clients' expectations, between cost and schedule and quality and scope. And it's not very easy, but with time and with experience, it becomes the blueprint for how to achieve it becomes there, so it becomes a little bit easier. And the key word, the key approach to follow is always teamwork, and that's a concept that varies from one location to another. Coming from an American background, it's very clear that they foster the teamwork approach between owner, designers, project managers, construction managers, and the contractors, because it's a collaborative effort by the end of the day. Many of the other approaches that we have to experience is mainly the claims-oriented approach or letter-writing approach, where you need to always put the blame on somebody else rather than working together. So quality is high up, always in the priorities after safety, naturally. And one of the biggest challenges that we face working in Vietnam, as Michael had mentioned, working in India, even working in countries like the Philippines, that is a little bit more a mature market compared to others, is the training training program for the labor, and the minimizing the turnover of labor as much as possible, and making sure that there's always a proper planning for the number of gangs and the supervisors that are there, particularly when you're working on a fast-track project and there are activities going on all the floors, 50, 60 floors at the same time, in order to meet stringent schedule requirements.
Southeast Asia, anyway, is very, particularly, Vietnam, is very price-driven. I mean, that's really how that market operates. In the U.S., when I was there, we used to do GMP contracts. We'd have open book, and we'd be invited in probably at about the DD stage is when we'd actually be, awarded. So we'd actually be working with the consultants, the design consultants, almost immediately. And we would be able to set up the logistics plans, based on does the ground floor need to be a little bit heavier, beefed up, because that's where I want my trucks to drive in. Where are my cranes going to go? So I can basically incorporate, the temporary elements into my permanent elements. Southeast Asia, or Vietnam, definitely hasn't reached that point yet where the trust is there, or maybe because of their public procurement laws or what have you, that they're willing to do that. It doesn't seem. They're willing to invite the contractors or just have an open book, as opposed to a hard number lump sum contract. And until that really changes, and until they start driving towards more of an integrated approach, I think we're just going to repeat the same problems that we're seeing right now. I do think it needs to be more of a collaborative effort.
On one of our projects, just a concluding statement, and then maybe we'll have time for one or two questions. We had the client sending their own engineers in the middle of the night to check if there are any quality breaches by the contractor who's doing some cleaning up or some rebar fixing or some minor concrete work. And the first thing in the morning is always, we caught the contractor doing this and you're not doing your job. So the emphasis that we always come back and say, it's not a matter of, you'll never be able to send people on every floor in order to check if there are any quality breaches or not. What's more important is to have a proper quality assurance plan in place with the necessary remedies in order to discourage anybody from actually. So managing by system is not really common in many countries in Asia. But that's the only way in order to try and drive that culture forward, to try and help improve the quality by being quality conscious throughout the various parties involved or stakeholders in the project.